let her hold for a minute.
Oh.
Thank you everyone for joining tonight's meeting. We'll start the show in about 30 seconds to a minute. We're waiting for everyone to be in the room. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you everyone for joining. We'll start in the next few minutes. We just want to make sure everyone's in the room. Thank you so much.
All right, good evening and welcome. We are so glad to have you here for this update to the community on West Hollywood homeless initiatives. My name is Anali Ray and I'll be your host for the evening. I'm the Chief of Strategy and Programs Officer at the Saban Community Clinic, and we have been a longtime partner to the City of West Hollywood. I am so pleased to welcome City Council members Mayor Lauren Meister and Mayor Pro Temp Seppi Shine. Both are the lead members of the City Council subcommittees on homelessness. Thank you, Mayor Meister, for opening up the evening with a few words.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending this community update on the city's homeless initiative. Our goal in bringing you this update tonight is to keep the community informed about what the city is doing to address homelessness. Council, commissions, and advisory boards are routinely updated on the city's homeless initiative and our 5-year plan to address homelessness. Tonight, we are focusing on bringing some new information and new insights to you. We have a panel of speakers from the city's contracted homeless outreach teams who will be here to answer your questions. After the panel, you'll learn about 3 big projects our council is leading with city staff, including the city's feasibility study and application to the State of California Home Key program. If our application to Home Key is successful and we are awarded this state grant, it will help us purchase and rehab the Holloway Motel and turn it into interim housing, making it possible to offer shelter with services for people experiencing homelessness within city limits. This will be a significant milestone in reaching the goals of the city's 5-year plan. Staff will also talk about the city's work to launch the first in the nation guaranteed income pilot program for low-income LGBTQIA older adults as a homelessness prevention strategy. And you'll hear about the development of a new first responder service like sheriffs and fire, but ready to rapidly respond with supportive services to community members in a behavioral health crisis. Before we get further into the agenda, Mayor Pro Tem Shine and I would like to welcome our council colleagues in attendance.
Thank you so much, Mayor, and thank you from me as well for everyone who is here this evening. It's so important for us to just have this discussion tonight because we know you're here because homelessness impacts all West Hollywood residents, housed and unhoused. We're joined here tonight by Council Member John Erickson and Council Member Lindsay Horvath, and you're each welcome to say a few words. Go ahead, Council Member John Erickson.
Thank you so much, Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem, and thank you all to the members of the public, as well as our business owners, as well as our commissioners and advisory board members, as well as all the staff that have put on tonight's really important topic. As we all know, this issue is something near and dear to all of our hearts here on the City Council, and I believe I'm not breaking any Brown Act rule by saying that here with all of us, because What we do for our community members, both housed and unhoused, is a core issue for our city, but it's a core issue for us as leaders. And it's something that we understand we get emailed about every day, and all the work that we can do, that we will do, and that we must do to make sure this issue is addressed accordingly and with the dignity, grace, and compassion and care that we all wish and respect for individuals. It's something that we can accomplish together. And I want to thank both the mayor and the mayor pro tem on the work on the homelessness subcommittee, as well as for my colleague, Lindsay Horvath, who has been working on this issue as well with her issuance with the Met team previously. But it's an honor to be here. I look forward to all the discussion and to seeing what comes back to the city for a fuller discussion. And I hope you all stay very safe and very healthy, coming from someone who was just very ill. And so I hope you all are washing those hands and getting vaccinated. Thank you so much.
Councilmember Horvath, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I think so much has been said already, but it's just wonderful to welcome everyone to this very important conversation. There's such incredible, there's Winston, he says hi. There's such incredible work that's being done on this issue, and I know it is what is top of mind for everyone in the community. How can we tackle this really great challenge that we have, not just in our city, but throughout the region? And it's important that we know what work is being done so we can understand what is working, and also know what more there is to do so we're able to best serve our unhoused residents, help keep our community safe, and work together to serve everyone in community. So I'm grateful to the work of the subcommittee. I know that you've been working hard to make sure we're able to have this conversation tonight, and grateful to our staff who work so diligently to make sure that we have as many tools available as we can to address these issues. So, and thank you to everyone who's participating in the conversation tonight and learning more about what we're doing so you can become more engaged and be involved in our community on this issue. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you to all the West Hollywood City Council members for their leadership on this incredibly complex issue. Next, we'll be providing you some context about the work being done by the city's contracted social service agencies and the range of services provided to the community to both prevent and end homelessness. To those of you who have already submitted questions, thank you. For those who have not yet, we encourage you to submit them throughout the event. Click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and we'll be able to pose this to our speakers. After the panel, you'll be hearing about the 3 new West Hollywood initiatives underway, and we'll have another round of Q&A with city staff specifically on the details of that work. Mayor Pro Tem Shine will lead us next with some context for some of the work being done on the individuals on this panel.
Thank you so much, Arnali. To address the needs of people living in the city of West Hollywood without housing, the city of West Hollywood contracts with local nonprofit agencies to provide services, including shelter, mental health support, substance abuse treatment, connecting to government benefits, jobs, legal assistance, health services, and more. Here in WeHo, we even have tailored services to support youth, older adults, people living with HIV, and gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender community members. I know we all see challenges related to homelessness in our city and throughout our region, and it can make you question what is being done to address this crisis: an affordable housing crisis, a mental health crisis, a human crisis. Sometimes the city's services for homeless community members may be difficult to see from the perspective of housed residents and the business community. To give you a sense of the work that is being done, Katie Egan from the city's Social Services Division is going to provide an overview of the agencies we contract with and the outcomes of their recent experience.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and good evening, everyone. The city has a long history of funding social services and currently invests $5 million annually in programs for the community. Of that $5 million, $1.2 million enables local nonprofit agencies to work directly with people experiencing homelessness and connect them to shelter, substance abuse treatment, healthcare, mental health services, and housing opportunities. Street outreach teams also provide food, hygiene kits, blankets, socks, and other supplies to people living on the street. City staff coordinates the purchase and distribution of these supplies through a variety of funding sources. Outreach services are provided in the city 7 days a week, including some early morning, night, and weekend hours. Outreach teams also follow up on calls to the West Hollywood Homeless Concern Line when community members call to share information about a person who needs support. To understand the impacts of these teams, tonight we're going to look at 4 markers of progress that focus on preventing and ending homelessness. Much of this information has been provided in other public meetings, so I will keep it very brief. But on this slide, you'll see the data from the city's current contract cycle. These numbers reflect 2 years of service outcomes from October 2019 through September 2021. As you'll see here, homeless prevention through rental assistance, which was greatly expanded by City Council during the COVID-19 pandemic, has reached just over 1,000 households. While rental assistance helped these housed community members from becoming homeless, the city's shelter providers served unhoused community members by providing 66 adults and 47 youth with a total of 10,655 nights in shelter. In addition to providing shelter, 106 people ended their experience of homelessness and moved into stable housing, while 116 formerly homeless community members received housing retention services that helped them to stay housed. All of these services I've described and many more contribute to successfully ending the experience of homelessness for West Hollywood community members and keeping existing residents in their homes. Next, we'll have an opportunity to hear directly from the teams who are working daily with our unhoused community members. This group of people from Essentia, Housing Works, NCJW, the LA LGBT Center, Step Up on Second, and the MET team are dedicating their professional careers to being part of the solution to end homelessness. We are lucky that they bring this commitment to serving West Hollywood, and they truly are making an incredible impact. The panel will be answering your questions about homelessness and the services that they provide. If you have any questions about their work or anything that's being discussed, please submit them by pressing on the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And I will pass it over now to Arnold so that we can get started.
Thank you so much, Katie. So as we get into this conversation, we want to state as a collective here tonight that we all fundamentally agree that homelessness is wrong. We are all impacted and we are all deeply concerned about this crisis. It is imperative for us to be part of the solutions to end homelessness as a community. At Saban Community Clinic, we are addressing homelessness by ensuring access to medical, dental care, behavioral health, case management, hygiene, showers, both in our clinics and externally in the field. So tonight we're working here to answer questions that are currently being submitted and were previously submitted. When we see the questions getting at the same issue, we're going to combine them in order to get through as many as we can. So with that, I'll tee up the first question for Sarah Garcia from Step Up on Second. So the question is, it's clear we have a lot of people on the streets and in the parks. They are visible and some of them have been here for ages. What is being done about this issue? I don't see all these services and teams that were mentioned earlier. And when I call the homeless concern line and speak with city staff, I still see the person on the street, but don't hear back about the status of the situation. So I'll look again to Sarah Garcia from Step Up on Second to answer this question. Step Up West Hollywood Mobile Interdisciplinary Team provides outreach, case management, housing resources, and street-based mental health. Also substance use support to help our unhoused community members. Sarah, can you respond to this question, please?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for your questions. So I'm part of the outreach team for Step Up. We're out there every day, engaging folks on the street. We do wear plain clothes primarily because some folks don't want it to be publicized that they're experiencing homelessness and receiving services. And so the plain clothes are intentional to be able to connect with people in a more casual way. We engage folks and meet them where they're at. You know, if they want to engage and have a conversation, we often start there. And then it often, over time, you know, it becomes services, becomes enrollment, becomes housing, and then permanent supportive housing. We build rapport over time. Some people are able to engage us immediately and are willing to enroll, get to work. Unfortunately, there is a very long process. Department of Mental Health work, housing, services. It's all part of a very complicated system, and we don't always know when resources become available until they do. So some folks we meet, they want to engage in services, and it's very quick. With other folks, I think with the majority of folks, they want to build rapport. I've been doing this work with Step Up specifically for over 3 years now, 3 years and a month today. And there is somebody that I was engaging very passively over the last 3 years. And then this past summer, he came up to me and said, you know what, I've been watching you and I trust you now. I do need services. Can you help me? And this is something that's happened repeatedly over time, is that people see us on the street. We may not be very obvious to people that are not experiencing homelessness, but the folks on the street do know us. I carry a tote bag with a cat on it. People notice that. And they know that I have resources, whether it's hand sanitizer, a mask for them to be able to enter stores, or connecting them to resources that we collaborate with. It's not a simple process. You will see people on the street after we already engage them, and we're not able to tell anybody, actually this person is receiving services. We're having therapy with them every week. We're taking them to housing services to get their ID. That's all confidential. So you won't hear back from us about that. If the person discloses to you that they are receiving services, that's up to them, and more power to them. But it's a process. Some folks can enter a program for housing or shelter very quickly, but some folks have had to wait 6 months, a year. We don't really know. There's no algorithm to it. I wish there was. So we're in it together. What I tell folks when I meet them is that this is a ride. It's a roller coaster, lots of ups and downs, and I have no guarantee when that ends, but I'm in it with people until we get there. And even after, supporting folks into housing and their transition into being housed for the first time in what may be a year, 5 years, one person 9 years, another person 20, almost 30 years. And these people are survivors, and they continue to survive. And a lot of my work, I'm just happy to be there for their story.
Thank you so much, Sarah. All right, our next question is for Emily from Step Up on Second. The question is, I feel like a lot of the people I see in West Hollywood who are experiencing homelessness are also mentally ill. What is the city doing about that? Emily, can you take that question, please?
Good evening, everyone. Yes, it is true that there is a higher prevalence of mental illness is among people experiencing homelessness than the general population. And this is really due, it's a complicated issue. This is really due to a number of factors, including the possibility that mental illness is perhaps the reason the person became homeless, or the possibility that the trauma of becoming homeless triggered underlying mental health issues. I kind of try to paint the picture to imagine what it would be like having your basic sense of safety threatened on a daily basis. Imagine not knowing where you would sleep or how you would eat on a daily basis, and compound that over time, the stress and the trauma that would have on an individual. Substance abuse can also be a mitigating factor, and I'm not meaning to stigmatize that, because many of the people that we work with will reach for coping mechanisms that will relieve their distress in the quickest way possible. And unfortunately, sometimes often street drugs are easier to access than psychiatric drugs. And it's sort of the human condition to self-medicate with whatever works most quickly. And that's not unique, certainly, to people experiencing homelessness. I would say that's generally true for the general population at large. It's also much more challenging for someone to effectively address mental health issues while on the street. For one, their thoughts and actions are primarily concerned with the activities listed above, with just survival. For another, our mental health system is extremely fractured and difficult to access. And it's fractured and difficult to access not only for people who are trying to receive services, but also for we, the service providers, to provide services, which is a much larger systemic issue. Our clients report often that for example, their medications get lost or stolen on the streets, or them having to travel to appointments to meet with a therapist or a case manager is very challenging to our unhoused neighbors. And that's part of the reason that West Hollywood has contracted with Step Up, and we purposely deliver street-based services. We bring the services to our clients, including getting them into housing, providing mental health, behavioral health, substance abuse, case management services, with the whole goal of, getting people into housing and then working to keep them in housing, doing home visits and continual aftercare services. I guess I would also like to add additionally that just because a person is experiencing homelessness and has a mental illness, or any person with a mental illness for that matter, does not mean that they are more likely to engage in violent behavior or engage in criminal activity. In fact, there's multiple studies that have shown that people experiencing homelessness are far more likely to be the victims of violence. I would think also that that's one of the reasons that people might come to be in the city of West Hollywood. It's known as a safe city. I'm thinking particularly of the LGBTQ population. Being on the streets is acutely more dangerous for them, and they are very likely to get attacked or worse in many other areas of Los Angeles. Additionally, there are very few safe shelter options for people in the LGBTQ population, which is a sad reality, but it is a reality. And women, I know as well, often feel safer in West Hollywood for many of the same reasons. I will say that we do tend to see significant improvement in mental health symptoms once someone is moved into permanent housing. And that's why Step Up operates from a housing first perspective and philosophy, which means we do not require medication compliance, sobriety, or any of the other criteria that have typically served as a barrier to a person accessing housing. We move someone into their apartment or housing option, and then the real work begins, and we provide very intensive wraparound supportive services to help keep them in housing. And I will say that as an agency, our housing retention rate after 1 year is currently at 98%. So it's a lot of work, but it works. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Emily. And I know we'll be hearing more from the city staff later about the development of a crisis responder to meet the community mental health needs. All right, the next question is, how many unhoused people are currently in West Hollywood? I will turn that question over to Corey.
Thank you so much, Arnold. In West Hollywood, our last homeless count with LASA was in 2020. The 2021 count was canceled due to COVID impacts. But in 2020, our homeless count for West Hollywood was 112. And then if you look at kind of comparing that or giving some context, the count for 2020, again, for LA County was 66,433. And for LA City, it was 41,290. In West Hollywood, again, our count was 112. And then Essentia, who you'll hear from later this evening, also does a monthly count the last Friday morning of every month. And our kind of average over the last few months has been about 42 people who have clearly spent the night in the city. So that's our context in terms of scope and of the issue. Thank you, Arnold.
Thank you, Corey. That information is really helpful. Okay, the next question is for Rachel from National Council of Jewish Women. The question is, the number of homeless people seem to keep growing. What is the city doing about that? And do you have anything that would prevent homelessness in the first place? We heard earlier about the city's programs and services to address homelessness, but let's talk about some of the prevention measures in place. So NCJW has provided a wide variety of social services for decades. It is currently providing rental assistance for community members at risk of losing their housing and is the nonprofit administrator for the city's upcoming guaranteed income pilot project. Rachel, I'll let you take this question.
Thank you so much, Arnali, and thank you to the City of West Hollywood for having us here this evening. So NCJWLA, we are longtime administrators of the city's rental assistance program, delivering cash assistance to community members facing financial emergencies that will prevent them from being able to pay rent. Rental assistance is designed to help community members avoid eviction and maintain stable housing in the city. So during the pandemic, the number of people who have needed to access social services support has grown exponentially, with many people navigating the assistance and support process for the first time in their lives. This reflects the precarious financial situation that so many people find themselves in, and the well-known statistic that the majority of Americans do not have enough money in savings to cover a $400 emergency expense. Prior to the pandemic, our rental assistance program would support between 30 and 35 households a year. The majority of people receiving assistance were able to maintain their housing with this emergency support. They are able to recover from the temporary setback and then continue to pay rent on their own without additional assistance. But the pandemic was a massive shock to a large portion of the population. Certain sectors, food service workers, hospitality workers, entertainment, the people who really make the city run and contribute to the vibrancy of West Hollywood, were suddenly out of work for 2 weeks with no ability to pay rent on April 1st. In the past 2 years, we have been able to support 550 households with more than $1.5 million in COVID rental assistance. And more than 90% of recipients have been able to maintain their housing in the city after receiving direct support. We have helped people who have children in the home, who are caring for ill or aging parents or community members, who have been abandoned by their roommates, people who have lived in West Hollywood for more than 20 years. All of them contribute to making the city what it is and what the city strives to be. But one of the most important interventions we can provide to people to prevent homelessness is direct cash assistance as rent relief to help see people through a temporary, unanticipated setback, a towed car, a dental emergency, falling ill at a job with no or minimal sick time, to prevent a small and manageable problem from becoming a life-altering devastation. The city's investment in rental assistance is a critical demonstration of their commitment to helping community members avoid homelessness. And our new partnership for the West Hollywood pilot for guaranteed income, which you'll hear more about later this evening, is another example of how direct cash assistance can provide support and housing stability.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was really, really informative and exciting. So the next question is for Corey Plank. And on a related note, how is the city working to make more affordable housing available in the community? Corey, could you take this question for us again?
Sure, thank you. And thank you, Rachel. The prevention piece is obviously very important. The city has, since its founding, had policies designed to help protect tenants through rent stabilization policies, and also to increase the supply of affordable housing through support for partnerships with the West Hollywood Housing Corporation and others, but also with inclusionary housing policies, which require developments to have 20% affordable or inclusionary housing units within those developments. Additionally, through the city's Affordable Housing Trust Fund, in the last 2 years, the city has allocated $11.3 million to EAH housing to develop 98 units, which 50%, at least 50% will be permanent supportive housing, which we're very excited about. And then we also allocated $2.1 million in gap funding to the LA LGBT Center for its senior housing, senior affordable housing for the LGBT community. So those are just some of the ways that we are through policies, but also through investments from our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, increasing the supply of affordable housing.
Exciting news. All right, the next question is for Katie from the city's Social Services Division. The question is, it seems like the problem of homelessness is worse in West Hollywood than in other cities. Why does West Hollywood allow this type of situation? And do you know what other cities are doing that we aren't? Katie, go ahead.
Thank you, Arnold. There's a few things I want to touch on with that question. And I really just want to reiterate what Arnold said at the top of the meeting, and that is no one at this meeting tonight believes that it's okay for people to be living on the street. Our council members, city staff, all of our agency partners who are here today, we're all here because we believe that everyone deserves a safe and affordable place to live. So I just want to start by saying that. And second, I think many people here would agree that the city of West Hollywood is unique in almost every way. And one example of that is, since our founding, WeHo has been a beacon of hope for many people who've been rejected by their families and friends due to their sexual orientation, gender identity, or even their HIV status. So many people actually come to West Hollywood to be part of a community where it's safe for them to be themselves. And I know Emily touched on that too a little bit earlier. And, when folks do come here, for the lucky ones, those plans work out. But for others, they face a very high cost of living, and a couple bad rolls of the dice can result in people ending up on the street. But regardless of why or when people come to West Hollywood, or how long they've been here, if those kind of bad rolls of the dice happen and someone is experiencing homelessness, it's the city's goal to make sure that those are one-time experiences and that they're brief. As a city, West Hollywood focuses on the root causes of homelessness, which means we're invested in strategies like increasing access to affordable housing and making mental health and substance use treatment readily available. So that's our goal. But as anyone who has ever loved someone who struggles with mental health or substance abuse knows, I have loved people with mental health or substance use issues, and that recovery and healing process, it takes time. And it's not always a linear process. And on top of that, we have a nationwide affordable housing crisis. And that has been felt especially hard, not only in West Hollywood, but throughout the Los Angeles region. And that can make it really difficult to bring someone into housing. And it takes longer than any of us would like. And I want to be honest about that. But that said, this work is really challenging, and we hear the community's concerns. We share in those communities' concerns. We know that, our unhoused neighbors are the most impacted by this crisis, but our housed community members are impacted as well. And we want to continue to do more to bring people off the streets. A part of that is that the city, as we've kind of alluded to earlier in the meeting, we've been incorporating your feedback into new projects and services that are seeking to address some of these most pressing needs. So we've heard directly from you all that we need more access to shelter beds, we need more affordable housing, and we need a more immediate response for people who are on the street that are in crisis. And so we're taking that feedback, we're working to respond effectively to those needs through the development of the Interim Housing program and a new crisis response team that is dedicated to providing mental health and social services support to housed and unhoused community members alike. So those are just two examples of the ways that the city is looking to expand the current system of services in order to respond to those concerns from our community. And for the sake of time, I'll stop there, but some of my colleagues on the panel will be talking about those plans in more depth a little later on. So definitely stay tuned to get those details and learn more.
Thank you for sharing those insights, Katie. All right, next I'll tee up Chris Namath from LA LGBT Center for the next question. By offering all of these services, the city is going to become even more of a magnet for unhoused community members from other parts of the city. So again, Chris from the center will respond to this question. For context, the LA LGBT Center's youth services provides comprehensive services for LGBTQ youth, including shelter, housing navigation, case management, educational, vocational services, and outreach. Chris?
Hi. Los Angeles, Hollywood, and West Hollywood specifically have always been a destination for young people, both housed and unhoused, looking for safety, acceptance, and community. The risk, I think, is not having supportive services here to catch them when they arrive. We find that youth often come here looking for what they couldn't find in their home communities, and we hope that we provide something better and safer in our space. Additionally, the services and the support of the community of West Hollywood facilitates healing and helps us engage young people in more services. Basically, the safer they feel, the more likely they are to work with us and let us help them. a lot of our programming is focused on helping young people build community, because we believe that along with employment and education, supportive services and housing, a supportive community is what will help them succeed long term. West Hollywood becomes a big part of that community. And you know, I think we all do better when we belong to a community. Just to give kind of a tangible example, you know, we currently have a young person who's living in our transitional living program who was rejected by very religious parents because of their trans identity. Their parents sent them to live with an aunt, and they really tried to make it work. They enrolled in community college, really, you know, tried laying low and getting along with the family, but they were really abusive, and it was unsafe and overwhelming. The youth eventually left and went to West Hollywood because they felt they'd rather live on the streets and be who they are. Eventually, this young person was able to get connected to our services, and they, you know, obviously, as we've all talked about, it takes a while to get into housing, but they were eventually able to get into one of our crisis housing programs, enrolled in our culinary arts training program, and also are attending community college. And I think this just goes to show that the outcome for young people can be very different when we catch them quickly and have services available for them.
Thank you, Chris. Our next question is for DMH clinician Maria Rivera and Deputy Sergio Venegas from West Hollywood's Sheriff's Mental Health Evaluation Team. They provide mental health support, crisis intervention, psychiatric placement for housed and unhoused people with mental illness who come into contact with law enforcement. So the question is, too often I don't feel safe in my neighborhood. When people are screaming and clearly having some sort of psychological situation, why can't the sheriff take them into custody or a place where they can get mental health care? All right, Maria, go ahead.
Good evening. It is difficult to see individuals in your community who struggle with the mental health issues and refuse to seek help. In order for an individual to be placed on a welfare and institutions code 5150 or 5585 and be involuntarily committed against their will, they have to be a danger to themselves, a danger to others, or be gravely disabled due to a mental health condition. We evaluate considering suicidal and homicidal risks, such as the individual having a current suicidal, homicidal thought, plan, means to carry out their plan, their capacity for the individual to care for themselves, such as being oriented, having proper clothing for weather, plan to obtain food, and shelter from elements. If they don't meet criteria but would benefit from further resources, it is discussed by completing a safety plan and referring to local community treatment centers and service providers. If we took them against their will, it would be considered kidnapping on our part, as individuals have the right to not seek or receive mental health services such as therapy or medication. When they meet criteria, we write the application for a WIC 5150 or 5585, Article 1, detention of mentally disordered persons for evaluation and treatment. A licensed medical doctor makes the ultimate decision to release the individual or to keep them up for up to 72 hours or longer. A great benefit in working in being able to serve West Hollywood is our ability to build rapport with unhoused community members and check in with them weekly regarding their well-being. If we get a call regarding an unhoused community member, we take into consideration their current presenting symptoms and baseline regarding other previous interactions we've had with them. Tips provided by community members are considered, but ultimately we make our decision based on mental health assessment, which can last anywhere between 15 to 40 minutes. If they're able to verbalize their name, the date, location, situation, express their plans on how they're going to take care of themselves and manage their daily activities despite their housing circumstances, we begin the process to link them to community services for their untreated mental health symptoms. Our ultimate goal is for the individual to voluntarily seek out the mental health services for their untreated mental health illness. When they're displaying in public their mental health symptoms, such as talking to themselves, screaming, and hearing voices, but not necessarily having current suicidal or homicidal thoughts, plan, or an intent. For example, there were various calls for service for an individual who could be observed many times talking to themselves, screaming, and that was due to an untreated mental health illness. Prior to my partner and I approaching, we would observe the individual displaying the symptoms reported by community members. Despite their symptoms, this individual was able to articulate a plan on how they're going to care for themselves, what they're going to do for the rest of their day. They remembered us from previous encounters. They were not in any danger to themselves or others, and would ask regarding sometimes their housing status, or if we can get in contact with different providers that they're seeking treatment with. We would take this opportunity to contact these providers and ask regarding their status, ask the providers if they maybe had any concerns that we weren't aware of. Now that would be some encounters. And now there was other encounters where the individual needed medical attention, and we'd call fire and they would transfer to the nearest emergency room. Now, other times, because of our previous encounters, the individual could be seen to be deteriorating in their mental health and baseline. And at that time, if they met the 5150 application criteria, we would psychiatrically hospitalize.
Hi, everyone. My name is Deputy Venegas with the West Hollywood Sheriff's Department's mental evaluation team. The VET team is a unique team composed of a DMA technician and a plainclothes deputy sheriff with approximately 1,000 hours of extensive training in mental health, such as crisis intervention, API crisis negotiations, and advanced de-escalation techniques. We are thought as of the SWAT team of mental health. The West Hollywood Met team is the first and only contract city in the county, which means we stay in the city of West Hollywood to offer our unique services. One of our services is homeless outreach. We try to make a connection with our unhoused community members and gain a rapport with them in an effort to help find them long-term housing. An example of this is we had an unhoused community member who did not want to leave a specific bus bench in the city. And after talking to the person every day, I was able to build a good rapport with them. And my partner and I noticed his health was deteriorating and from his baseline, and had a place on my 5150 hold. When a community member makes a call for service for an unhoused community member experiencing mental health crisis, deputies will respond to determine if a crime has occurred. If the person has committed a crime, deputies will arrest them. And if the person has not committed a crime and the person calling in is non-desirous of prosecution for a crime, we, the MET team, will conduct a face-to-face evaluation of the individual. If the person does not meet criteria for a 5150 hold, we will conduct a safety plan with them and offer them further services and linkage.
Thank you so much for those responses. All right. Actually, I know the city has been doing a lot of advocacy work on this. Corey, would you mind highlighting that for a minute?
Hi, yes, thank you. And thanks to our MET team, we are the only city in LA County that has its own contracted MET team. The city council agreed to fund that so that we have a dedicated resource specific for the city of West Hollywood. And one of the things, as you heard from Maria and from Deputy Venegas, and trying to respond to a couple of the questions, you cannot force people into either substance abuse treatment or mental health treatment without meeting those criteria for 5150 holds. And we have done a lot of work to try to expand the definition of gravely disabled. There are significant challenges there in terms of where the line is between allowing people to languish on the street and then where the line for civil liberties are. But the city has advocated for an expansion of that definition so that more people would be able to meet the criteria for 5150 holds and hopefully get the care and support they need. However, there's a systems issue here that is very frustrating for all of us on this call who work within that. And then beyond that, kind of, even if somebody makes the criteria for 5150 hold, we're able to get them hospitalized, get them treatment, oftentimes in the process of them moving towards either a conservatorship or even a temporary conservatorship. If the person can, as our clinician outlined, if they can kind of formulate a plan in front of the judge, oftentimes those requests for conservatorship or temporary conservatorship are denied. And we have advocated on kind of a larger scale, but also on a case-by-case basis, where our agencies have called the treatment facility, where we have sent letters from city council, where city staff, agency staff have called and tried to provide, the MET clinicians have provided testimony in those hearings, and we still have been significantly challenged in having something stick. And so those are some of the systemic issues that we'll be looking at. We can't also force people into substance abuse treatment programs. We do have opportunities for diversion. We have an MOU with our sheriff station has an MOU with Tarzana Treatment Centers, and the city has a social services contract with Tarzana Treatment Centers, so that if somebody is ready and willing to go into substance abuse recovery program, both for detox and residential, that is available to West Hollywood community members, whether they're housed or unhoused. And so those are some of the services that we try to get people to access. But as you heard, forcing people or requiring people to access those services is just simply not possible at this time. And we understand the frustration of that. We share some of the frustration of that. And we will continue to work on advocacy efforts to address some of those challenges.
Thank you so much, Corey. It sounds like you have a wide array of services here in West Hollywood, which is amazing. All right, the next question is for Clifford from Step Up on Second. I walk around different parts of the city a lot, and I feel on edge when I'm walking and see someone who's experiencing homelessness, and I don't know if I should do anything. Do you have any advice for what we can do if we see someone and aren't sure if anyone's trying to help them? Clifford, can you speak to this as a licensed clinical social worker?
I sure can. And Arnold, thanks for that question. And I appreciate the City of West Hollywood hosting this and being farsighted and solution focused in how we're addressing this very complicated issue. So first, I really understand folks maybe feel on edge or uncomfortable walking around, or if they experience somebody they think may be homeless. And I just like to remind our housed community members that the homeless individuals or the folks you may identify as being homeless are really a microcosm of the city of West Hollywood. And that, I appreciate the folks in West Hollywood being so generous, but I would really encourage you to reach out to the City of West Hollywood Homeless and Concern Line. And that number is 323-848-6590. Again, 323-848-6590. And they'll reach out to Step Up, and we go out as quickly as we can to assess and address the concern. We ask folks not to engage individuals if they are on your residence or at your business. Certainly, if somebody if they say hello to you or they make contact with you, be civil, be kind. Let us come out and address these issues. We are in the city daily. I understand again, the need to want to provide somebody maybe some money or some food, and I can't tell you how many times. And I'll tell you, I've been doing this for 9 years with Step Up, and 5 years contracted with the city of West Hollywood. I can't tell you how many times we have been engaged with someone who is experiencing homelessness, and folks will go by and offer them, dollars and bring them food. And this can be a mixed message and can be confusing for our unhoused community members, because they may feel like they're being rewarded for perhaps just being kind of stagnant in their homelessness. And they may get distracted from really tackling the issues at hand, which is to try to get the social services, the housing support. And that is where we would like to really come in and bring that unhoused community members focus with us, and the potential that we can provide in getting them social services and housing. But yeah, again, please do reach out to that concern line. We'll do our best to be out there. We've been out daily for years now. We know many of the community members. I would also share, I think Emily touched on this earlier, that our folks with severe and persistent mental illness are not a threat. I would just encourage everybody to practice situational awareness, just like you would anywhere in the city. And you're probably more threatened by those folks who are not part of the homeless population. And if you see somebody, who we call it responding to internal stimuli, but someone who's talking to themselves, regardless of the intensity. Don't feel threatened, but reach out to the city's concern line. We'll come out, we'll address this, and because I've approached homeless individuals who were speaking to themselves or yelling at cars or at individuals. When I walk up to them and address them, they oftentimes snap out of it, and they can have some focus on how what I'm saying and how I'm trying to assist them. So I think right now we're doing our best we can to address this complicated problem that some folks experience as a problem. It's just a challenge for many individuals who are facing homelessness to try to get those services that are out there. But we try to make ourselves available in the community. And again, thank you, the city and the political spectrum and the commissioners for allowing us to support our housed community members, because we support you by those services that we can provide to our folks in the city of West Hollywood. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Clifford. All right, the next question is for Chris Namath from the center. I see people who are experiencing homelessness at night. Does the city have outreach teams that go out at night? So Chris, would you mind sharing what your program does? All right, there.
Yeah, our outreach teams go out both in the evening and during the day, but with the limited resources, we try to focus most of our efforts towards daytime outreach, where we can connect youth directly to services in real time. In the evening, we're mostly focused on providing information, supplies, and referrals, but since programs are closed in the evening, it requires us to follow up the next day, and sometimes that can be hard to reconnect. In comparison, if we meet a new youth on the streets during the day, we can transport them to the youth center and work on housing referrals while providing other immediate supportive services such as food, showers, medical, mental health support, and family reunification. Our outreach teams typically provide three very distinct services. We provide support to young people currently living on the street, with the goal of building trusting relationships and trying to engage them in supportive services. And sometimes that can be a short process, and sometimes it can be really long. But our goal is to just keep continuing to visit them, support them, bring them supplies, get them what they need, always with the goal of helping them exit the streets. The other thing we do is that we're trying to find new youth who've recently fallen into homelessness and connecting them to housing and services quickly. And then the third thing is that we just are spreading the word about the services we provide to youth, up to the age 25. And we find it really valuable to spend time in West Hollywood around the bars, clubs, and restaurants to make sure young people are aware of our services, both for themselves and for any friends that may need any of our services in the future. We often find that, and we do most of that work in the evening. We spend time in West Hollywood and we meet young people, we talk to them about what we do, and we just provide those kind of resources and information to them. And often we'll find young people get connected to us because one of their friends gave them our card. And so that's really important.
Chris, I actually have a follow-up question. What is the biggest objection people have to accepting help?
I think that, for us, the biggest objection is just trust. It's like until I, trust what you're offering, I'm not as likely to accept it. And so I think a lot of our work is going out and building those, relationships. Sometimes we'll go and visit somebody and they won't talk to us, but then we'll go back the next day and, and maybe they'll talk to us, or maybe they'll, just look at us. But eventually, if we keep going back, keep engaging them, they'll be more likely to engage in the services we have to offer.
And it's so wonderful to see all these organizations working together to build the trust of community members. All right, the next question is for Eden and I, Luna, from the LA LGBT Center Transgender Economic Empowerment Project, TEEP, which provides street outreach and a variety of services for transgender and non-binary people. The question is, my friends and I disagree about the best way to address homelessness. I'm guessing that since you are all in social services, you think that that is the way to go. But what about more sheriffs to deal with unhoused people who are dangerous or committing crimes? Go ahead.
Thank you, Arnali. Those are great questions, and I'm really glad to be able to engage and talk a little bit about the nuances of law and how it impacts social services. And so when we're having this conversation, I think we have to think about a few things and keep these perspectives in mind as we're approaching real life service models and the implications of law on people. When we think about laws, we have to think about, are these laws focused on a moral compass or on terms of the consequences of an action or a crime? What defines a crime? And how are these laws enforced? And ultimately, what we see is that people who are already marginalized, people who are homeless, people who are engaging in underground economies are most impacted by laws, especially the LGBTQ communities, people of color. Someone like me who would have been labeled a cross-dresser maybe 40, 50 years ago would have been punished by the law simply just for existing in LA. And so that's the reality of our clients, our community members, that we have faced criminalization for so long. But what do we use this method of law and crime to be able to serve? What is the purpose of these principles? And I think that instead of punishing people, we should look at ways of restoring justice, of restoring lives. When we criminalize a homeless person, this could potentially raise a barrier for someone to be able to apply for a job or apply for housing. I can't tell you how many people I meet who are people who used to be substance users or people who used to engage in survival-based sex work, and they can't apply for a regular service job because they have one misdemeanor or one thing on their record. And it's important that as providers, as neighbors, as a community, that we are mindful of this, that these barriers have real effects on the lives of people. And how can we adjust these models to be able to offer alternatives, whether it's diversion, whether it's a record clearing service, whether from a business perspective, how are we hiring our unhoused members so they can lift themselves out of homelessness? It takes a village, and we really all have to chip in here and just at the end of the day, consider being compassionate for people and our neighbors. Many of us are surviving COVID, and this has effects as far as our disabilities, people who are surviving long COVID. And so all that in mind, these are lived experiences. These are real people with real lives who are navigating laws and navigating employment and housing as a result of them.
Thank you so much, Luna. All right, the next question is for Alicia Brown from Essentia. Essentia is an organization that provides comprehensive services, including housing resources, shelter, case management, and street outreach for adults experiencing homelessness. So what is being done for people related to COVID-19? Alicia.
Thank you, Arnelli. Battling this pandemic has been very difficult for all individuals, including homeless individuals, and the services that we're able to provide them. For instance, it takes only one single confirmed case of COVID-19 in either client or staff to be placed in a quarantine. Once in a quarantine, no new intakes or clients are allowed to enter the shelter or interim housing programs. Once we're in a quarantine, it takes 14 days from the very first day that was tested positive to come out of the quarantine. You have to go 14 days with no negative test results for the quarantine to be lifted. So for instance, you can go a full week and everybody's practicing social distance and they're wearing their protective gear, and the first week there's negative and you're excited. And then you go to the second week, and at the end of the week you test, and it would only take one person to come back with a positive test to go into another 2 weeks of quarantine. That presents frustration for our clients that are self-exiting because they don't want to be in quarantine. Mental health issues arise, and no housing navigation is being done, which results in expired housing vouchers and subsidies, no shelter stays, and just a lot of chaos. I know it all sounds like doom and gloom. However, community partners have been proactive. When shelters and services are suspended, we do conduct over-the-phone intakes, and we utilize a wait list for clients to enter services once the quarantine is lifted. Also, organizations such as ourselves, as well as the LGBT Center and other community providers, have hosted regular vaccination clinics and events with the Department of Public Health Services. At these events, they are open to our clients and the overall community. At these events, there's free testing, vaccinations, and booster shots, as well as they're giving away $25 gift cards, snacks and backpacks and all sorts of things to get folks to participate. We are also having periodic information sessions with both Department of Health Services and their doctors and clinicians in order to be more informed so that we can address our clients' questions and concerns about the COVID-19 vaccination. As Katie mentioned earlier, our outreach teams are out passing personal protective equipment to the community, as well as water and snacks and other documentation and information so that folks can keep themselves healthy and safe, and so that we can continue with our service delivery. In addition, clients who are symptomatic and have nowhere to stay, they may be eligible for temporary medical shelters or quarantines or isolated housing through the Department of Health Services referral line. I do have a number for that. It is 833-596-1009. They are open daily from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And also for other services as it's related to COVID-19, you can always call the community hotline at 211. Just to stay up to date and informed of all the services that are out there.
Thank you so much, Alicia. That's really helpful information.
No problem.
All right. The next question is for Deputy Venegas. What is the criteria for responding to calls about unhoused community members displaying dangerous or threatening behavior?
Sorry, can you repeat that question one more time, please?
Yeah, sure, no problem. What is the criteria for responding to calls about unhoused community members displaying dangerous or threatening behavior? So what's the criteria?
Each call for service is a case-by-case call for service. So there's many factors. Is if the person has a weapon, such as a knife or a metal stick, deputies and us would try to de-escalate and to detain them and conduct an investigation and to see if the person reached criteria by doing a face-to-face evaluation and gather more information from witnesses or the informant. So there's many different aspects of a call for service for us, and it takes time to get all the facts together and determine the outcome of the person.
Great, thank you so much. All right, our next question is for Robert Morrison from Housing Works that provide primary service is housing navigation and keeping people housed. So hi, Robert, what does it take to keep people housed?
Well, it's an excellent question, Arnold, and I appreciate whoever submitted it. I think that there's been so much that's been said here tonight that serves as a foundation to answer this question. But I like to think about this in terms of kind of thinking about homelessness as a survival situation, moving folks to stability, and then getting them to a place where they really have what they need to thrive. I do think it's important, though, to start by understanding homelessness as an ongoing traumatic experience. And I think that we all now have some kind of common experience that's just a little bit like that, maybe, which is the onset of COVID-19 back in March 2020, right? I think for myself, I think of how disorienting that experience was for me. I think of the shock of going to the grocery store and not having food there. I think of the distrust of walking up to people for the first time after being locked in my apartment for many months, right? And all of those things are just a little bit of a taste, I think, of what people who are homeless and on the streets experience. And I just invite everybody to reflect on that with me. But what we do whenever folks are moving into housing is we really focus on getting somebody safe and stable first. And I think that there are many common challenges that someone might have when they move into housing. Maybe they haven't paid their rent. They haven't organized a budget in a long time to pay rent and utilities. Maybe they don't have the skills to deal with conflict if they have a neighbor who is, saying something to them or doing something or just creating a little bit of noise. Maybe they're having mental health symptoms from untreated mental health that are creating a problem with a neighbor or with a property owner, right? And so our staff were able to work with and work with folks to identify what those problems might be and try to head them off. Sometimes we're not able to head those problems off, and we help folks respond, to those problems, and we use those points as a learning experience to help people gain the skills that they need to just kind of keep their apartment up in that way. But over time, people generally will get those basics down. We have access to resources that can help whenever there are problems. Maybe they missed rent 1 month, or maybe they're having difficulty keeping their apartment clean. So we have some resources that we can tap into to help with those situations. But in the long term, it's really important that the support is ongoing. Because it's people that become homeless often are people that are vulnerable to becoming homeless again, often for the same reasons that might have led to their homelessness in the first time. So it's really important that we have that ongoing relationship with folks to head off any additional crises. For instance, there's a community member that we've supported in permanent housing for many years who just had a stroke last year. And after her stroke, she became unable to do some of the things that she was able to do before the stroke in terms of keeping up her apartment. But she wasn't exactly excited to share that with anyone. There was a lot of embarrassment and shame. And so, but because we were able to work with her and identify that early in the process, we were able to keep that from becoming a bigger issue that could lead to her losing her housing again. Beyond that, I think a very important part of helping people stay housed is moving from that place of just stability to that place of thriving. And that goes back, I think, to solving that problem of social isolation. So we really want to work with people to connect to community. We want to take that connection to community and lead it to a place where people can contribute in a way that's meaningful to them. So whether that's helping someone, connect to some senior programs where they can engage with others that are in their peer group, or if that means someone wants to volunteer actually with us or another organization, we help make those connections so that folks have something meaningful to do. We also at Housing Works have a peer workforce development program where we train folks who have been homeless how to work in this field, helping others who have survived that same phenomenon. And find that to be really important, both in creating an inclusive community where we can all recover together, but also in providing something meaningful to do so that folks can move away from, relying on some of these emergency or crisis-oriented resources and really finding that long-term stability. So it's certainly something I could talk about for a long time and be excited during the whole thing, but I think that gives you just a little taste of kind of what it takes to help people stay in housing once they're home.
Awesome. Actually, Robert, do you mind staying on? Because I have a question for both you and Alicia from Essentia.
Sure.
If you could talk a little bit about the length of stay, both in permanent supportive housing, and then Alicia can maybe touch on interim housing.
Sure. Yeah. So permanent supportive housing is permanent. It's meant to be permanent. So folks can live there as long as they need to. The three main characteristics of permanent supportive housing are that once you're in it, you can be in it as long as you need, that there are services that are there and available to you, and that housing is affordable. So all three of those things remain true the whole time.
Awesome. Alicia, do you think you could speak to interim housing?
Yes. Interim housing is more of a non-permanent housing. Typically, it's transitional housing. So it could be a shelter or maybe an enrollment into a program for drug rehab where they provide services and counseling. And then once you're done, you're exited out. So it's not quite temporary, but it does give a client some time to gather and do more intensive case management.
Great, thank you so much. All right, our next question is for Chris from the LGBT Center. What do people do once they get off the street and are no longer experiencing homelessness? If their daily existence was focused on survival, what's the process like to having a place to call home and all that time freed up? I know that's a really challenging we've had clients at Saban who've experienced it. And it's a difficult process. It's quite the transition. So Chris, would love to hear your response to that.
Yeah, I think it's often a transition for the youth. You know, we know that they need time to land and settle and to feel safe, but also know that they need things to do. So we try to balance that by offering both safe space for them to just be and lots of opportunity to join in activities and programming. We often say that it's the youth's jobs to walk through the door, and then it's up to us to provide services that are engaging that people want to participate in. You know, often the youth have experienced that the places such as schools and churches and families that should have been safe and supportive are the root of their trauma. So we're patient and creative and in all of our engagement process. We also find that sometimes young people decompensate when they get into housing. For the first time, they're able to relax, and with that sometimes comes increased mental health symptoms. As they begin to process the trauma from their community of origin and their time on the street, they sometimes need a space where it's safe to fall apart. We try to create programs around each individual youth, providing the specific services that are helpful in that moment. And when they don't want to engage, we just keep trying. We often find that, you know, some of the services that the youth will engage in first are the ones that are just in front of them in our drop-in center. You know, we'll play bingo once a week, and you know, and they won't engage in anything else, but they love to play bingo. We have a music studio inside our academy, and you know, what young person doesn't like to listen to and create music? And so we're always trying to find new creative ways that maybe you're not ready for employment yet, but are you ready to participate in this group or this activity, or go to the community garden, or go on a hike? And we think those things are just as important as, you know, enrolling in school or employment. I can give you an example. We have a young person living in one of our long-term housing programs. And, you know, and he got into the program, and he really, you know, every time we'd see him, I'd check in with him. Oh, what are you up to? You know, are you ready to check out school? And he's like, he would always just respond. He'd say, no, I'm just working on my mental health right now. And then I would, you know, remind him that, you know, drinking on the corner wasn't working on his mental health. And so, but we kept having those conversations over and over, and the staff and the different programs kept engaging him, and he wasn't interested in employment. He felt, you know, that his mental health, he wasn't ready to work. But eventually one of the staff talked to him about cooking, and he decided that he wanted to learn how to cook. And so they got him to enroll in the culinary arts program, and he completed the training program, completed the internship, and then got a job at a local restaurant. And now every time I see him, he's smiling, and I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm working. I'm just always working. I love working. And it's like such a huge transition from where he was, you know, even 6 months ago. And so, but yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, Chris. All right, we just have a couple more questions left. So this question is for Alicia. How do we help those who have a dog or a cat and don't want to give them up to get into housing? I think we all love pets, so totally understand. Go ahead, Alicia.
How do we, so for instance, with our, at Essentia, when we have clients that have support animals, what we typically do, we have access to a therapist that we can set up a time for them to meet with our clients and provide them the documentation that they would need to have a support animal. It is illegal for folks to deny individuals that do have these support animals, to deny or say an individual is not able to move into any housing. I can give an example as someone that does rent out a home. I had an individual come and didn't talk about it. Nothing was shared, which is fine. And on move-in day, they had a couple of support animals, and it was fine. I know the law, so they were welcomed, and it was like, this is great. But I would advise, if you are ever turned down from having your needs met and your animals, your pets, your support system, please contact. There are local services that are free for clients and folks that need assistance in those matters.
Thank you so much, Alicia. All right, our last question is, we need a regional and dynamic approach. Is the city coordinating with other municipalities? Corey, I think I'm going to turn this question over to you.
Thank you. Yes, the city is very actively engaged with the West Side Cities Council of Governments. There is a staff homeless working group among those jurisdictions, which include Beverly Hills, Culver City, Santa Monica, and then the LA City Council and LA County districts, city council and supervisorial districts that are in that area. So we do work very closely with our neighboring cities. We are part of service planning area or SPA 4. So we are for the West Side COG, they're in a different service planning area, but we work closely with our SPA 4 folks as well, which our service planning area includes Hollywood and Skid Row. And so that does sometimes create issues for us in terms of how resources are allocated to the city of West Hollywood. And the city, our residents voted overwhelmingly in support of Measure H. And the county received that money, not the individual cities. We have had some success in securing some Measure H dollars to help us with things like feasibility study that you'll hear about a little bit more later this evening, and to create the city's plan to address homelessness. And so I just also want to add, because I'm looking at some of the questions, some of the things that kind of in regional and dynamic approaches, there are approaches. We have worked across city boundaries on issues of encampments that were actually in the city of LA, but really abutted the city of West Hollywood. Arnold was a significant part of that work as well. And then there were some questions about our protocols consistent across cities to address encampments or tents. They are not right now. So each city has different ordinances. And so there is not a uniform policy in terms of how to address encampments or tents. We typically are able to respond to those situations pretty quickly, but we definitely know when we hear from neighbors about those situations, we want to make sure that we can respond as quickly as possible with both our outreach teams to try to engage folks, but when people are trespassing on private property, or when things are unsafe, or people are engaged in illegal activity, those are calls for the sheriff. And so I know that's an issue that comes up. So if people have concerns about those situations, they can call the non-emergency number at the sheriff's station, or they can call the homeless concern line that we shared earlier and that we'll put up on the screen again before the end of the evening. And I think there was one other question. I'm going to try to get a couple other answers in real quick before we go to back to Mayor Pro Tem Shine. One of the questions was about the expenditures that the city makes for homeless services. And Katie talked about that when she mentioned all of the social service agencies that the city contracts with. And the total social services funding is a little over $5 million annually. And of that, 1.2 million helps fund some of the services that you've been hearing about tonight. So trying to get a bunch of responses to some of the questions in the chat. Keep them coming. We're going to have another opportunity for more questions later in the program. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mayor Pro Tem Shine to take us into the next section. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey, and thank you so much, Arnali, for facilitating this section. I want to also give my sincere appreciation to each member of tonight's panel and to your colleagues as well. The service you provide West Hollywood community members on a daily basis is truly changing lives. We've heard how you approach people with respect for their right to self-determination, dignity, and personal identity. We also hear how closely you are working with people to maintain their trust in you as a source for support, encouragement, and resources that can end their experiences of homelessness. For members of the community who may have learned something new and feel motivated to increase your support for this work, and if you're wondering, what can I do to help? You can read more at www.weho.org/homeless under the How to Help section about volunteering, donating, and getting equipped to engage on this topic. I'll pass the virtual mic back to Mayor Meister to start the next segment on new city projects.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And I just want to give a quick shout out to Councilmember John D'Amico, who's joined us. So a big ticket item on the 5-year plan is establishing bridge or interim housing and day center facilities in West Hollywood to serve people who are homeless in the city. We've been awarded a grant through LA County Measure H Homeless Initiative funds to pay for a team of experts to work through the process of assessing sites in the city where it would be feasible to offer these services. We've had a unique opportunity in terms of timing to identify a major funding source through the state of California to potentially purchase the Holloway Motel with home key program money and turn the hotel into an interim housing site. Interim housing offers people a shelter bed and supportive services, and we have brought on our existing shelter partner, Essentia, to co-apply for this funding with us. If we're awarded the home key funds, it will be a smart financial strategy to bring these services to West Hollywood with the majority of funding to support the purchase, the rehab, and some operating costs coming through the state. I'd like to now introduce Abby Arnold and Associates, who will walk us through the feasibility study and what may be possible at the Holloway Motel. And I realize we have a lot of questions about this project, which we will answer after we get through this section.
Thank you so much, Mayor Meister. It's just been a pleasure to work with the mayor and Mayor Pro Tem Shine on this project as we move ahead. And the whole city council has been so enthusiastic about it. It's been great. Next slide, please. I wanted to start by providing a bit of background on this project. I've been a consultant along with my coworker, Jenny Swan, who's here with the city for many years. And over the past 6 or 7 years, we've conducted extensive demographic surveys of the homeless population. We did it annually from 2016 to 2019. And in fact, we were going to do it in 2020, and then we weren't allowed to go out and talk to people. So we're now recovering from that, but we had such good data during that time. And we found that the circumstances of people who are homeless in West Hollywood are very different from unhoused people countywide. For example, we don't have families with children in West Hollywood, and many, many more of our community members who are unhoused have non-binary gender identities than the countywide numbers. So in 2018, we helped the city council craft the 5-year plan to address homelessness, which was approved by the council that year. The plan called for creating places where people could be referred for services, an access center, interim housing for people who are working on getting housed, and then permanent housing. And over the last year, we held conversations with City of West Hollywood service providers, all the people who you saw during the last segment, to discuss the best use of a homeless services facility within the City of West Hollywood that would be dedicated to really expediting people's journey to permanent housing. The service providers gave us a very clear picture of the most important services based on their knowledge of the current homeless population and the information that we got from the 2018 and 2019 demographic surveys. My coworker, Jenny Swan, will tell you about what we heard. Next slide, please.
So the social service providers identified some critical services, including beds located within the city that are easily accessible so that people are more likely to accept shelter and services. And also to have a dedicated space for meal distribution, dining and group activities, and access to computers. And also to have private space for case management and client interactions, and also for other types of group activities. And also to have a space for healthcare and for checkups and for distribution of medication or health and hygiene items. Next slide, please.
So I'll talk about potential interim housing services and services sites. We are conducting a feasibility study about various sites for an access center and interim housing and permanent supportive housing. And over the past 6 or longer years, we've heard from many people that the Holloway Motel would be a great place, but it was never available. And it kind of makes me smile, because all of a sudden during the pandemic, the Holloway Motel closed and its owners became interested in making it available for city purchase. And at the same time, as Mayor Meister mentioned, the state of California announced that they had allocated $1.45 billion to rapidly expand shelter and housing for people who are experiencing homelessness. So we are now applying for funding through the state's Project HomeKey program to provide an interim housing site that will have 24/7 staff and security, where community members can connect to services and move off the street. The motel will be brought up to health and safety standards before it is occupied. And it will take most of a year to secure the funding and complete the improvements. So, you know, we can't move people in right away. It's going to take a while. I don't know whether any of you have been in there, but it's really not ready for occupation at this time. But once we get the money, we'll be able to move ahead quickly with the improvements so that people can move in. Next slide, please. The interim housing services that will be offered at the Holloway would be stays of up to 90 days to allow for adjustment to living indoors and for people to have time to apply for and move into permanent housing. To do that, some of the service providers earlier talked about all the things you have to do to get people in. It starts with, you know, for some people, even just getting ID. They've lost their ID, their identification along the way. They have to establish some kind of an income and get qualified for the housing subsidies that they'll need, and get a healthcare provider, and get their physical and mental health stabilized, and then find a place to live. So that takes 90 days at best, and we'll hope to move people through that quickly. The Holloway will have 20 single occupancy rooms for interim housing, including ADA adapted rooms for people who need more room to manage their wheelchairs and other assistive devices. One of the things we're very excited about is that having single occupancy rooms means that people don't need to identify with one or the other gender. Most programs like this have a women's side and a men's side, and that just won't work in West Hollywood. So everybody can have their own room. And there will be space for individual and group counseling and educational groups and other things to help people learn to use their time productively. That's one of the places where we may be able to get help from community volunteers. At other programs like this, we find that someone might be willing to do a yoga class or a writing group or other kinds of what are called psychosocial groups that help people socialize with each other, learn how to use their time productively. And we'll also be providing 3 meals a day. And again, it will be staffed 24/7 with a counselor and security. So there will always be somebody on site that the neighbors or people in the community can contact if they need to talk to somebody about what's going on and what services are available. So I'll turn it back to Jenny to tell you what's coming up for this project.
Next slide, please. So there will be plenty of opportunities with community meetings that are going to be dedicated to discussing the Holloway site and the proposed services. and how we all can stay involved. Discussions will include conversations surrounding questions like, as implementation of the new facility begins, what would you like the city to be mindful of? And, as you come up with those ideas, when we go to the next slide, there's an email address that will help you stay connected, and you can send in your questions and your comments so that when we have those community meetings, we can harvest what you're already thinking about and address those ideas. The next question that we really want to have be addressed at meetings is, how can the community contribute to the success of the city's interim housing and services site? The city of West Hollywood is such a rich community filled with so many people that work in so many different fields and have so many great different interests that can really add value to the community that potentially will happen at an interim housing site in West Hollywood. Next slide. And so here are all the ingredients to stay connected. And of course, we will be emailing you if you get connected. If you have questions, but you can go to strategic initiatives at weho.org and you can email those questions, but you can also sign up to receive notices about the community engagement meetings and get homeless initiative updates by visiting, as other folks have mentioned, weho.org/homeless to subscribe. And of course, on the City of West Hollywood calendar are all of the meetings that will be happening around the homeless initiative. So we look forward to seeing you guys there, maybe in person soon. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Abby and Jenny, for that update. Obviously, there will be a lot of community conversation in the coming months about that project, and we look forward to having opportunities to talk about that with all of you in those future opportunities. Now we want to move into one of the other projects that we wanted to share information with you on, which is the city's guaranteed income pilot project. And we will have Diane Kahn-Epstein, the Strategic Initiatives Program Administrator, join us and give you a brief overview of the Guaranteed Income Program.
Thanks, Corey. Good evening. As Corey mentioned, I'll be talking about the launch of the city's first Guaranteed Income pilot as it connects to the city's homelessness prevention efforts. But first, I'd like to go over some basics about what is guaranteed income and the purpose of the pilot and who the city's partners are. Next slide, thanks. There are numerous guaranteed income pilots happening throughout the country, and they provide a monthly cash payment directly to individuals. The payments are unconditional, there are no strings attached, and they provide an income floor to a targeted group of people for a specific amount of time. A guaranteed income pilot is a way to test the impact of those cash payments. The pilot's purpose and partners, specifically for West Hollywood, is to launch a pilot to evaluate guaranteed income as a way to prevent homelessness, support community members as they age in place, and reduce the stressors of poverty and financial insecurity. The city has two administrative partners, the Center for Guaranteed Income Research at the University of Pennsylvania as the research and evaluation partner, and National Council of Jewish Women, NCJW, as the nonprofit administrator implementing the pilot. NCJW has been a valued city contracted partner for decades and has been vital in implementing the city's rental assistance program, as you heard about earlier with Rachel, to help keep residents housed, especially during COVID. In order to launch this pilot, city staff secured two external funding partners to cover the participant cash distribution portion. Measure H Innovation Funds for Homelessness Prevention was one, and the second was an individual donor who is a University of Pennsylvania alumnus who's interested in guaranteed income and honoring her late partner and supporting LGBTQIA and older adult populations. Next slide, please. The pilot, here's the specifics about the pilot, will give $1,000 a month for 18 months to 25 people who are randomly selected by the University of Pennsylvania from an eligible applicant pool who meet the following criteria: a West Hollywood resident, identifies as LGBTQIA, are 50 years or older, and living with an income of $41,400 or less. And that's based on HUD, the Housing and Urban Development's area median income, 50%, which is the very low income category. The pilot's population aligns with our city's history, current demographics, and the data, which indicates the vulnerability of this population. National data shows that LGBT older adults are less financially secure than their non-LGBT peers due to experiencing lifelong disparities and barriers to accessing programs that support aging adults. And people ages 65 and older are the fastest growing age group of people who are homeless. Reporting from our local social service agencies, many of whom you've heard from tonight, and data from the city's 2019 community study also affirms the vulnerability of these West Hollywood community members. Next slide, please. Here's some information about the application, which opens on Friday, February 25th, 2022, and will remain open until March 6th, 2022. Information is available now by going to www.ncjwla.org/WHPGI. WHPGI stands for West Hollywood Pilot for Guaranteed Income. And the application will be posted there on February 25th in different languages, Russian and Spanish, as well as English. For help completing the application, people can call NCJW at 323-852-8500, extension 650, or email whpgi@ncjwla.org. The pilot will run for 18 months from April 2022 to August 2023. And for additional details, if you're interested from the city, you can, about the pilot's goals and supporting data and partners, please go to weho.org/strategic initiatives and see the projects in the pipeline section. Now, thank you, and I'll pass it back to Corey.
Thanks so much, Diane. As we move into the next update on the Behavioral Health Crisis Response Unit, wanted to just give a little bit more information. This item has gone to the City Council a couple of times previously. We'll be going back again to City Council with another update on the progress update on the development of this type of service and team. It's important to note any behavioral health crisis response unit will be an addition to the city's existing continuum of services, both the social service side and the first responder side. This is not a replacement for the city's existing social services or for our existing first responder system. And so one of the some of the information we want to share with you tonight is really about a first responder system to focused on providing mental and behavioral health support for people who are housed, as well as our unhoused community members. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth Anderson, Strategic Initiatives Program Administrator for the city.
Thanks, Corey, and good evening. So I'll start with a little bit of context on the project. In response to the social reckoning of 2020 and the increased mental health crisis needs that have become very clear during the pandemic, the city is seeking new ways to address community needs and think differently about how we are approaching our crisis and emergency response system. City Council has identified an opportunity to enhance crisis services by broadening the expertise of our first responders. Right now, the quickest response for a person in a mental health crisis is either from law enforcement or the fire and EMS system. But we could change that by starting a behavioral health crisis first responder team that's equipped to bring supportive services immediately to people experiencing a mental health or substance use related crisis. The team would serve as a third emergency responder to complement our existing contracts with LA County Sheriffs and the fire department. So now there's many reasons why this type of service would be a really good fit in West Hollywood. This approach improves community members' quality of life and connects to the city's core values and work to advance racial justice and social equity. It also reduces reliance on law enforcement and fire services to meet social service needs. And we believe it will strengthen the connection between crisis services and West Hollywood social service providers to enhance care. We've been doing extensive engagement with experts in the field and researching existing programs throughout the country to design a model that's the right fit to serve the West Hollywood community. So this slide summarizes what the behavioral health unit could look and feel like in West Hollywood. Stakeholders, commissioners, and advisory board members have provided great recommendations and guidance. They want to ensure that the staff are diverse, they reflect the community served, and that they provide a warm, welcoming, and destigmatizing experience for the person receiving care. The community wants to ensure that crisis calls get assessed correctly and that the right service is deployed when someone calls for help. People were split on using 911 or an alternate number to access services. In the proposed model, the unit would be a peer to fire and sheriffs, responding to both housed and unhoused community members in need. When a behavioral health crisis call comes in, the behavioral health unit, again, they would be that third option that could be dispatched to respond to the scene. And maybe that would be independently, or it could be in collaboration with fire or sheriffs. The behavioral health crisis unit will be able to provide on-site assessment, supportive counseling, first aid, and non-emergency medical care. The unit will conduct welfare checks and help with resource connection and referrals, suicide prevention and intervention, and provide rides to other services. The team of a crisis worker, a medic, mental health clinician, and case manager would work closely with the city's contracted social service agencies to connect people to community-based services after the immediate crisis is resolved. Now, setting up community and city expectations for the unit is definitely going to shape the success of the program. And here are some proposed expectations so far. So the unit's going to be responding to emergency calls. It'll serve all community members, housed and unhoused, visitors and residents. If the crisis calls for it, the behavioral health unit will have the capacity to conduct assessments for psychiatric holds at the scene or loop in other resources as needed. They'll be able to connect the person in crisis to community-based social services funded by the city, and the unit will be able to respond to people experiencing homelessness, conduct welfare checks, and do other outreach. But the unit will not be removing people from public spaces or removing people's personal items. This list of expectations will continue to be developed to enhance community understanding of how this unit will operate and serve people in need. We're projecting that the operating budget for the 24/7 mobile crisis unit is between $2.5 to $4 million annually. These costs include the contracted staff who will be staffing the van and also expanded city staff capacity to work alongside with the unit to ensure its success. There will also be infrastructure costs like supplies for patients and the mobile unit staff, the purchase of vans, and a technology platform to document services provided so we can measure the impact of the team on the community. We'll also want to be investing heavily in communications, like ongoing community education and marketing. It's going to be critical to the success of the program. We are researching a range of potential funding sources to address the costs to operate the program, including city general funds, Medi-Cal, government grants, and philanthropy. We'll be returning to Council on March 21st with an update on our work over the past several months and presenting on things like the feasibility of external partnerships, including with agency partners and the LA County Department of Mental Health, a potential best path to address the dispatch and call center operations, the results of exploring identified funding strategies, and also continued monitoring of the changing regional landscape. There's a lot of great work to be done, but we'll stop here and look to answer your questions about these three projects: the behavioral health unit, the guaranteed income pilot, and also the feasibility study.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And thanks to everybody who has attended this evening. As you can see, there's a lot going on. And we know that there are the challenges, challenges remain, and we will continue to try to address those. We do want you to stay in the loop. and make sure that we can, have you signed up for email lists and get information about upcoming meetings of this type as well. But right now, I'll ask Elizabeth, Diane, Abby, and Jenny Swan to go ahead and put your cameras on and leave those on, and then we'll go through a couple of the questions here. One of the first questions was, can the city use general funds for guaranteed income? And I'll just reiterate what Diane shared is city staff was able to secure external funding to cover the disbursement costs for the guaranteed income pilot program. So no general fund dollars are being used for the disbursement of the guaranteed income program. And then second, there was a question just to provide clarification about the Holloway and the home key application. The city is negotiating the purchase of the Holloway. That's in process, as is our home key application, which would provide the funding to do the help recoup some of the acquisition costs, but also the rehab and operating of that program. And I think I have another question that is here for Elizabeth regarding the behavioral health. Is West Hollywood the only city looking at a team like this, or will this connect to anything else in the county or the region?
Great question. So West Hollywood is designing a program unique to this community, but we also know that our neighboring cities and the West Side COG are actively working on alternative crisis response strategies, everything from Beverly Hills, Culver City, and Santa Monica, and even City of Los Angeles is doing new pilot programs to address the needs of people in crisis. So a lot of action at the city level, and we are tracking that to ensure we understand what our neighbors are doing. And then also we are very closely watching and engaging with LA County Department of Mental Health. I think a big piece that we've heard from the community in terms of if the behavioral health unit arrives on scene and somebody does need acute care, where do they go? And that is a very pressing question because we live in a region that has a lot of demand for acute psychological services and not enough supply of places to go and places to get the treatment people need. So fortunately, not only is DMH working on developing an alternative crisis response strategy that is a mobile unit expansion, but it's also looking at the overall mental health care system and looking at how what its strengths are and what the gaps are, and devising a strategy to expand the brick and mortar places to go throughout the region. And that work is definitely well timed with the interests of West Hollywood to be able to provide that crisis response. And as a contract city and a partner with the county, we will definitely be leaning on them for support and looking how we can partner so that people can get the care they need.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This question is for Diane. Why are there only 25 people in the guaranteed income pilot when there are so many who need funds now, especially during COVID?
Love that question. Thank you. The infrastructure that's required to successfully operate a guaranteed income pilot is complicated, and it requires a lot of planning and administration and funding and time. So for this pilot, the city did raise both public and private funds for the distribution portion, as Corey had commented. And the larger the pilot is, the more funding needs to be available. So the goal of this particular pilot is to allow the city to test the effectiveness of guaranteed income on a small number of participants to see the impact on housing retention. That's one of our specific goals, working with the University of Pennsylvania, health, mental health, income stability. And if the data indicates that this is a beneficial, impactful program, as we are hopeful it will be based on the other pilots that have been launched and are completed or near completed, then we'll be able to look to creating another pilot that's includes a larger number of LGBTQIA older adults, or create a different pilot that addresses a population of other vulnerable community members, or both.
Thank you, Diane. And for Abby or Jenny, how soon would the city hear about whether or not it was successful in its home key application?
So the California Department of Housing and Community Development is notifying applicants within 45 to 90 days. So from the time that we turn in our application, which will be by the end of this month, we should hear by May or so.
Great, thank you. Another guaranteed income question: is 18 months long enough to do a full evaluation of the guaranteed income program?
There are many different pilots happening in different periods of time, and they have guaranteed income. Center for Guaranteed Income Research is working on 29 different pilots throughout the country. That number seems to increase all the time, and some of the pilots have been shorter. We are actually on the longer side, and it does allow people to accumulate some savings, which, as Rachel had commented earlier in tonight's answers to questions, that people can't afford a $400 emergency, 40% of Americans. So having the 18 months to accumulate some savings does help, as well as allow people the opportunity, just as it would for all of us, to be able to look at improving other parts of their life, whether it means further education or trying self-employment opportunities, and expanding and looking at different ways to provide additional stability later on.
Another guaranteed income. You've got the hot seat tonight, Diane. Will there be other financial information available to program participants, and what would be the impact on people's existing benefits?
Excellent question. Benefits are very complicated because there are many different benefits, federal benefits, state benefits, and some benefits would be heavily impacted and it wouldn't make sense for people to participate. For example, if you're on SSI or SSDI, which is a federal benefit, there are no waivers for this particular program, guaranteed income anywhere. So generally that's a large portion of someone's income. It's difficult to apply for that benefit, and it's difficult to be reinstated later on. So that wouldn't be a benefit that if someone receives that they would want to pursue guaranteed income, most likely. On the other hand, there are other benefits that are state benefits that are for a smaller amount, like CalFresh, where if you receive $78 a month, it makes sense to receive $1,000 a month and then to reapply later if needed. And then the likelihood of being reinstated is more likely. But this is just kind of general information. We're not advising anybody on what to do or not to do. There's actually a benefits counseling portion that takes place during the onboarding after people are selected, where someone will talk through what your different benefits are and be able to help you assess. The whole goal of guaranteed income is to empower people to make these decisions and provide them with the agency, just as we all would appreciate, to make decisions over their own financial situations.
Great. There were a couple other questions. One was related to people experiencing homelessness. If they didn't have a mailing address, how would they be able to get some of the materials they needed to secure housing? And I'll just add in here that some of the agencies allow people to use the agency addresses or secure PO boxes or other things so people can receive mail and information. And thankfully, a lot of those things are also available via email. And we try to make sure people have access to internet services, computer services, either through the agencies or through the library and other resources. We had a few questions about what are the gestures or small things people could do to support people experiencing homelessness in West Hollywood. And I know we still have a couple of agency folks on here, and Clifford talked about some of the challenges related to that. And somebody asked specifically, is there a piece of paper that I could give? And the answer is yes. We have brochures available. If somebody is interested, please feel free to email the Strategic Initiatives email that we'll put up again when we leave here, or call the Homeless Concern line and let us know you'd be interested in getting a handful of those to share, so people have access to resources and information. That's always appreciated, as long as people are doing that in ways that are, as Clifford mentioned, situationally aware and being mindful of safety. And one of the questions was also about the agencies. Are they community funded or government funded? For most of them, the answer to that is both. But we'll have more information on how to help the agencies and how to help kind of do your part, or find a way to be part of the solution in addressing homelessness. That's on the city's website at weho.org/homelessness. And you'll be able to take a look at information there as well. But certainly the agencies can always use additional, private donations, volunteers, in the protocols that they have in place for volunteers now with COVID. But there are a number of opportunities to get involved. There was another question. I'm going to try to get through as many of these as we can, and with a couple minutes left, in terms of are there plans, or are they're partnering with local businesses for work rehabilitation programs? And the city's, the West Hollywood Chamber of Commerce does have a homeless committee of business owners or managers in the community who work together to support some of the work of the city's homeless initiative. They do different holiday drives where they collect blankets and socks and other things. They've helped support the city's Homeless Services Connect Day by businesses providing free haircuts, by providing lunches to all the program participants. And they also have been actively engaged in the program that Chris Namath mentioned from the LGBT Center, which is a culinary arts training program, and hiring some of the youth who've been trained through that program to work in our hospitality industries. And they were very quick to sign up and participate in that program. So we do have a supportive business community who's actively engaged in trying to find solutions to these issues. And we're very grateful to them. We're also very grateful to all the agencies who do the work every day, and then who spent part of their evening with us to share more information as well. And I think, Elizabeth, if we can pop up that last slide. Here is more information. And I misspoke. It's just weho.org/homeless, not homelessness. And then you can follow us on social media at WeHo Cares on both Facebook and Twitter. The Homeless Concern Line, 323-848-6590. Again, that is a non-emergency number that can be used to let us know if there's somebody in the community that you are concerned about and want to make sure an outreach team follows up. If there is a safety issue, a safety concern, a criminal activity issue, please, if it's life-threatening, please call 911. If it's not, please call the non-emergency number at the West Hollywood Sheriff Station. And then there's our Strategic Initiatives email address if you would like to get more information, if you'd like to get more involved, if you'd like to get brochures, feel free to let us know and we will be happy to pick those up. And I'll go ahead, Mayor.
We had a question for me about where are we with a potential vacancy tax in order to make sure to provide money to prioritize higher quality mental health and substance use programs and assist in building more housing. And yes, that is something that we've asked staff to look at. A tax would have to get on a ballot, and that's what we would be looking at. It would have to get on the ballot and be voted on by West Hollywood voters.
Thank you, Mayor. And then there were some questions about how to support people and the Holloway and questions about that. As we mentioned, we will certainly be, when we have a successful home key application and the city is able to complete the purchase of that site, We will definitely be having lots of community conversations about how people can be involved and answer more questions about that. There was a question about can somebody stay more than 90 days in interim housing, and that is kind of that's the design at this point. But certainly in COVID, there have been exceptions if somebody's working toward their permanent housing.
Looks like Corey froze. But Corey's back.
All right, sorry about that.
Still there. We've had a couple of questions about, if people feel threatened on the street, what should they do? Will the sheriffs come out? And if we can just address that question, and also, what do we do about if there are people, passed out in the new park, and these are things that people want to know. What do they do?
Certainly. So the homeless concern line is the best place to call for a non-emergency response that is staffed by 3 different city staff members who respond to those calls within 24 hours and get teams out to make sure that they can respond and try to get people connected to services. Sometimes we're getting calls about people that we have connected to service. So it is great though to hear from the community, and it's great to hear when people are calling in concerned. If there is a safety issue or criminal activity, that 911 is the call to make. If there's something life-threatening or criminal, it is a 911 call. Whether the person is housed or unhoused, if it's criminal activity or life safety issue, that is a 911 call. For kind of the in-between, that's not waiting on an outreach team, but there are concerns about safety or trespass or other issues, that would be the non-emergency number to call the West Hollywood Sheriff Station.
Thank you.
We got one comment in there. Typically, those calls are answered in the same business day. Those calls are answered within the same business day, and teams are typically deployed the same business day as well. It's a pretty quick turnaround because we've got 3 different staff people on that line. All right. Okay. Well, again, I think we'll be looking forward to having a number of community conversations. We really thank you all for being here tonight. Thank our agencies for joining us. Thank our consultant team, Abby and Jenny. Thank you to Mayor Meister, Mayor Pro Tem Shine, and members of the City Council for all their work and their leadership and support of these initiatives. We really appreciate it, and we will we'll stay on for a few more minutes. Just staff will stay on if people have a few last-minute questions. Otherwise, everyone have a good night and be safe. Thank you.
There's Councilmember D'Amico waving at us.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.